Last time we were talking about inserting rows in our tables. I mentioned briefly referential integrity. It says I can't insert a row unless I have a corresponding row in a table that requires it. So if you look at your invoices table, and remember we were talking about this last time, you have to have a vendor already in place. You have to have maybe terms already in place, maybe a GL account, because as you add your invoice, you're going to be adding these line items. So everything that is connected has to already be in place. So we'll experiment with that a little bit today. Try to do some joins. But first, let's look at our update command and delete command, because as we're inserting data, it's really easy to get something messed up where we need to update it, right? So let's know how to do all the updates before we get into some more advanced ones. So this is the last insert statement that we looked at that we did not type in because it had all these column names. So remember, we can get super wordy. This insert statement is inserting the data that results from this select statement into those columns, and that's why we have very specific column requirements. So how do we update? We've got some rows in our table and there's some data out there that's not correct. We can use the update statement. The syntax is similar to the insert statement, except that with the update, the first thing we're going to have is the table name. So we're going to say we want to update something in this table. Then we're going to have the set keyword. And after the set keyword, we're going to list a column, setting it equal to a value, comma, another column equal to a value, comma, another column equal to a value. So we only put that set keyword one time, just like on the insert statement, we just put the values keyword one time. Now with our update command, it's really important that we specify a where clause. Otherwise, we're going to update every row in our table. So our where clause is going to limit what rows get updated. So it's super important. We can have our where clause be a standard where clause like we've been using all along. We'll look at some that are doing some subqueries with the where clause. And we can also specify a from parameter where we specify a table to use is input to our update command. Now the example that they have right here updates a row in our invoice copy table. We set our payment date equal to this value and our payment total equal to this value, and then we find this specific invoice to apply this update to. So let's try that statement. We should be able to find that invoice in our invoice copy table. I'm going to check. I've got the SQL Management Studio open. I'm going to close out these tabs that I have open. I was looking around. And I want to look at invoice copy. I do have it. I can right click on it and select top 1000 rows and make sure it's got data in it. Now, if you don't have it, you might not remember how to create it. Anybody remember? It was back. I'm going to find it because I want to find the exact syntax of what we did. And we should have saved it. We said select star into invoice copy, which is going to create that new table from invoices. So you don't need to run this command if you've already created invoice copy. You'll get an error like me that says that table already exists. But if you're not finding that table, do run this command so that you'll have it. Now, once we've got our copy created that we can kind of test with, let's create our update. Bless you. All of these sneezes and everything make you feel like it's Christmas time and it's like still 90 degrees out there. So we're going to update our invoice copy table. We're going to use the set keyword to say we want to set the payment date equal to 2016-05-21. So we made a payment, and we're going to set our payment total equal to 1935118. And then we're going to specify what invoice number it was that we made that payment for. And it was invoice number 97/522. So this is going to take care of applying that payment to this invoice copy. We would, of course, have to run it against our real invoice table to have it impact our real invoice stuff. But let's run it. Does it work? Everything good? Now we should be able to select that invoice. Select star from invoice copy, where invoice number equal 97/522. I'm just going to run that select statement. Now, when we were running an insert statement, we saw that if we executed it twice, it would fail because, or it would insert a duplicate row. The update statement is just going to update again. So, I mean, it's not going to hurt anything for it to run over and over, right? It's just going to make the same updates. But I'm going to look at this invoice copy invoice and make sure that the updates look good. Here's my payment date of 5/21. Our payment total of $19,351.18. So it looks like our update went through okay. Everybody got it? Work all right? Let's save that. Kind of quit putting the chapter numbers on because it seemed like it made things harder to find. So I'm just going to say this is an update because it's just kind of a basic update. Our first run. So what would happen if I weren't using this invoice copy and I accidentally left out the where clause and I updated every row in the table? What would happen? Can you guys hear him? Yeah, everything would be changed. So what's going to happen? What am I going to do? Just get fired? Do what? I don't have Control Z. Can I do anything if I didn't take a copy of that table first? No, I can't do anything. I could roll it back because the database is always journaling or logging every update that's made. So I could beg a database administrator to roll that back for me, but that would affect everything else going on in the company. So it's definitely not something to be taken lightly, because when we're working with our test environment, we can explore and try things. But when we're working with our real live data, we need to test and double test. And it's kind of like, you know, measure 3 times and cut once. We want to test this 2 or 3 times before we actually run it live. So it's easy to throw an update statement out there can make a big mess because we weren't thinking about it well. So always be thinking about it. Now, this next update that we're going to do.
My manager is telling me that my invoices backup is an invalid object.
Your invoice copy.
I need the invoices backup, but yes, it's the same thing.
So did you create it using the select statement?
Yes, and I have a query over here that returns the first 1,000 rows like you showed us how to shortcut.
Are you seeing the table over here? Because you might have to restart. Huh?
It is over here, yes, in the little menu.
So
What
kind of error are you getting? Do you want to show us?
Sure.
Because we haven't done a lot of troubleshooting of errors, so that'd be good for us.
Here we go. Like you can see here, it's in the red. And if I try and select it here,
Let me move you.
but like,
So if you run it, it's okay.
it's fine.
So remember, the SQL Management Studio is not automatically updating its memory to tell you that that new table exists. So its IntelliSense is only as good as it is, and it's not perfect. So you would have to restart SQL Management Studio to get that error to go away. Now, I'm not seeing that table. It's saying,
Right here.
yeah, but what table is it saying that it doesn't see?
Are you saying I need to create that table again? Because it didn't want to let me do that either.
But that's not the error you're getting. Look at the error you're getting.
Yeah, it's saying that invoice isn't valid either when I try and make a new table.
So is your invoices table really there?
It shows it here.
If you refresh, is it really there? Looks like it's there. I would just restart SQL Management Studio, save that query first or copy it and paste it. Yeah. Because sometimes it's just, especially as we create tables and do these dynamic temporary tables, it can get very confused. So it's a good tool, but it's definitely not perfect. And do your, now do your select into, do you have your invoice backup? Oh, it looks good.
Be select into.
Mm-hmm. You've already run it because it's got an error, so it looks good.
And let's see if this will do.
There you go.
Okay.
Perfect. So yeah, sometimes that Management Studio can be our worst enemy and our best friend. Great. Thank you.
I'm going to give it straight back now. Thank you.
Alrighty. Great. So we can see stuff. Okay, let's create a new query here. And for this one, we're going to update one column in multiple rows. So we have a, let me type it in here. Again, we're using our invoice copy table. In our invoice copy table, we want to update our terms ID to 1 where our vendor ID is 95. So every invoice that we have for this vendor, we would like to update their terms ID. When I type this query right off, it makes me wonder why the terms ID isn't carried on the vendor table, right? If I'm gonna update everything for this vendor, this looks like a design flaw in our database because our terms ID belongs on the vendor table. But since that database was designed the way it is, we're gonna have to update that terms ID on every invoice for this vendor. We could go look at all of those invoices and see what our terms ID is first. Let me run a query. I'll just run this select statement real quick. I guess I'll go ahead and get just that vendor ID. No need to look through all of it. Oh, so we have several rows in that table. And right now, we do have one invoice that has the correct terms ID, but all the rest of them are incorrect. So I'm going to go ahead and run this whole thing.
Hold on, it's saying my vendor ID for some reason it's not, it has a red line under it. Oh wait, hold on. Never mind.
So let's run this whole thing. We should do our update and our query again, and we should see all of our terms IDs now set to 1. Did that work for everybody? Got it, got it. All right, let's save that one.
I'm having the same thing like that.
Uh-huh.
And like it tells me that like they're just saying it's not getting mad at me, like it's even pull it up for me to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I restarted it as well, it's still not letting me see that.
Okay, let's see what's going on.
Like it just said invalid object name. Even though I refreshed it out of it. Might be not there.
Have you run your use statement?
No, I don't know.
Does that matter?
There, that works.
Did that work?
Yeah,
So if you guys notice, and that's one of those things I kind of do without really mentioning it, I hate to do that to you, but that's just the way the world is. I usually, if you notice, go in and open my database over here on the side. And so I'm putting that use statement in, but it's not mattering so much because I've already in my database. Now, if I didn't have this open over here, then I would get a lot of errors if I didn't execute my use statement. So that's just something I kind of do as habit from being a database administrator for a long time. I always just open the database I'm going to be working with. And I do put the use statements in, but that way I can run something separately. Yeah, so you don't have the use. And it's just because I have it open that it's working without that. So if yours is giving you trouble, that's why. Okay, so let's do another one. I'm going to do another new query. And this time we're going to update with a calculation. We're going to update our invoice copy table again. And we're just going to up the credit total by $100 for this one invoice. 97/522. So in this example, we're just going to update a column based on a calculation.
So it's like plus equals not working.
No. We could try it, but I don't think it does. I'll try it. I'm going to go ahead and put a select statement in before I run that. Pull this invoice. So I'll just run that select statement. And our credit total right now is 200. And I have my syntax set with this plus equal. So we'll see if I get a syntax error or if it works. Oh, it worked. It took it. I didn't think it would. Nice. Very good to know. Let's save it.
It just works.
Something works. Yay. We'll call this one update by calc. We're going to be using the same invoice number in this next query. So I'm going to copy this one and create a new one. Now I want to change this. We're going to use, based on a subquery, we're going to update our invoice due date. So we're still going to update a column based on a calculation, but we're also going to update a column based on a subquery. So we want to leave in setting the credit total up by 100, but I need a comma because I want to update another column, and that's the invoice due date. And I want to set it equal to the highest invoice due date in our invoice copy table. So this subquery is going to be looking at all of the invoices in our table, and whatever the highest invoice due date is what we'll be using for this invoice. I'm going to select the invoice first again to see what our due date is right now. So right now our invoice due date is 2016-03-28, and our credit limit is 300. So it should up our credit limit again and fix our due date. Or run the whole thing. So our due date is now updated, and we have additional credit. So it looks like it worked perfectly. So there is consistency here to SQL, to the language, because we can use these subqueries just like we could use them in a select statement in many different places. Like we could put it in our where clause, we could put it in our set clause. So whatever clause it's appropriate, we can use those subqueries. So let's save this one. This will be update, whoops, oh, not in uppercase there, caps lock, by a subquery. So we could use a subquery in our search condition to find which thing we want to update. Let's try another new one. And in this one, we're going to update a row using a subquery in our where clause. So we want to update our invoice copy again. And we're going to set our terms ID column, and we're going to change it to a value of 1. Now we want to specify which vendor IDs to be updated. So remember, when we're using a subquery, we could return multiple vendor IDs, and then all of those vendors would be updated. Or we could just return 1, depending on how our subquery is. So in our subquery, we're going to select the vendor ID, because that's the column we're trying to match to from our vendor copy, where our vendor name equals Pacific Bell. So it's kind of a meaningless subquery, huh? I could just say where vendor name equal Pacific Bell. But it shows us how we can do that. So I guess to validate my update, I will select are from invoice copy, where vendor name equal specific bell. And I want to run that select statement first. Doesn't like vendor name. Do we need to make a vendor copy? Do you have a vendor copy table? I don't. So let's create it. We're going to select everything from our existing vendors table into vendor copy. Do I have to do the into first? I always get those backwards. You'll remember. Okay, so I want to run this first. And I've got a vendor copy table now. So that should be good. So that's why we had to do that subquery. Our vendor table is where we can find our vendor name. So in our invoice table, using our invoice copy, we only have our vendor ID. So we had to use the subquery to get that name. So in my select statement here, I'm going to have to do a join. Or should I just change my where to be a subquery like this? I'll just copy this. And make that be my where clause. So I'm going to go through the vendor table, find Pacific Bell, use their vendor ID to match up to the invoice copy table to get all of their invoices. So let's run the select statement first. And we should see Pacific Bell is vendor ID 95. Right now, our terms ID is already 1. So let's change it to something else. Let's go back to 2 so we can make sure that our update works properly. And then I'm going to run this whole thing. Oh, it got mad at me. I'll have to get rid of this. Bless you. Can't do my select into again. But I'm able to do all the other stuff. And now our terms ID is 2, just like we would hope. So let's save that. Problem? Got it?
Mine still like telling me like it doesn't receive vendor copy, but
But it ran.
But it ran.
And it seems like after you use it a few times, it'll be like, oh, whoa, I guess that really is there. But it's really, yeah, mine is giving me errors still on it too.
There we go.
So it does not update well when you create new tables. So as you can tell, as a real world database person, you wouldn't be creating a lot of new tables unless you were doing some testing like this, creating temporary ones. Let's copy this one because it's kind of big. We'll go back to the bottom. Make sure everybody's got that one. In our next subquery, we're going to use the in clause in our where clause to specify that we could have a list of items returned from our subquery. Did you get it? Are you good, Alex? You sure?
Okay. Yeah. I'm good.
Got it? Okay. So I'm going to do a new query and paste this. Now, for this one, I want to just change our where clause. So we want to say where vendor ID in instead of equals. And we want to get all of the vendors that are in certain states. So I'm going to change that where clause to vendor state. And again, I want several, so I'm going to use the in keyword. And we would like to have vendors that are in California, Arizona, and Nevada. Now I need to make that same change to my select statement since I'm using my subquery in my select statement. I'll just copy this where line. I'm going to try run this select statement. See what kind of data we have. So when we pull all of the invoice information for vendors that are in those 3 states, we have quite a bit of information. So notice that we have different terms IDs, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're going to be making them all the same. So we're going to be setting all of those terms to 2. So let's run our update. And with our, oops, I still had that one selected. Run our update. And then our resulting select statement should show that everything for all 3 of those states got changed to 2. So a lot of power there in doing an update based on our subquery. Mhm.
I'm saying that, like, on that first line, the vendor name is invalid column.
Run this statement right here.
Yeah, I did.
You did. And then,
And the, like, update one where it's just this flag all from
uh-huh.
that, that's all.
Did you change it to be a subquery like this?
Yeah,
And you're still getting it?
yeah.
Do you want to show us? I'll stop sharing. You can share. Winter's coming. You're missing your from clause keyword. Select vendor ID from vendor copy.
Oh,
It also needs to say in, not equal, right?
This is the first one.
yeah.
So this is good, but yeah, you're right for that second one.
I have an S.
It's got an S, yeah.
All right.
Yay. Thank you for letting us debug.
We do so many just samples. Sometimes I'm not good at showing you errors. It's like, let's just get it working. Okay, so let's save that update.
Scroll down, wait for it.
Update where in.
Scroll down, wait.
Sure.
Go say.
Got it? Okay. Everybody good? Pretty intense ones. All right, this one is a really big one. So let's take it in stages. First, we're going to update based on a subquery. So let's start with our subquery. Our subquery, we're going to select the top 10 invoice IDs from our invoice copy table. Where our famous formula, where our invoice total minus our payment total. Minus, yeah, we need something for that. Do you see any way to create a shortcut in this thing? Use it as our subquery. So we want all the ones that we still owe more than $100 on. And then we're gonna order it by that same formula because we haven't typed it enough. Descending. Okay, so this is gonna be our subquery, our inner query. So let's run it and see what kind of results we get from it. Oh, I want to call it as top invoices. Won't let me do that yet, so I will wait. Now I want to run that, like I said, and see what we get. So looking at our top 10 invoices, here are the invoice IDs that we're seeing. So this is kind of a weird query, isn't it? Because it's taking the biggest invoice numbers out of all of the invoices that we owe more than $100 on. So it might not actually be, you know, something that we would run, but we can see how we can do that. All right, so these 10 invoices are the ones that we're going to be concerned about that should be getting updated. So now I'm going to fix this so that it is a subquery. I'm going to reactivate that as clause. And I'm going to put my parentheses. The parentheses are going to go before the select statement and after the descending clause and the order by. Now let's wrap that. I'm going to select it all and tab so that it's indented. And I'm going to put our update statement around it. We want to update our invoice copy table. And we're going to update our credit total. And we want to add 100 to it. Now, where we want that to happen are these top 10 invoice numbers, our top invoices. But we need an additional where clause. Now, because our where clause here specifies a column from our subquery being equal to a column from our main query, this is a correlated subquery. For every row that we get returned from the inner query, we'll be executing the outer query. Because we have to because of this where clause. And that's what correlated means. It's kind of like saying I'm going to stop, run out and do that outer query every time we get a result for this inner query because of this where clause. So every time I have an invoice ID from the top invoice, my where clause says you better go find it in that invoice copy to do what it wants you to do to it too. All right, so to really get an idea of whether we're getting the right things updated or not, we need a select statement to validate. So let's see. We really want to select our invoice ID and our credit total. From our invoice copy. And then in our where clause, we're going to say we want this invoice ID to be in the results of our subquery here. Copy. So we're just copying that same subquery where clause down to the select statement so that we can make sure we do a valid update. So I'm going to run this select statement. I have our inner select, our subquery, and our outer one. Let's see if it'll run. Oh, there we go. So we should end up with 10. And a lot of our credit totals are 0. So we should be able to see the impact of this update pretty easily. So let's run it. Run our whole thing. And now in our output results from our select statement, everybody's got $100. So take a look at this one. This is a pretty complicated one. Make sure the whole thing is on the screen for you. So anytime we start doing the subqueries, we can really open up a lot of power. Let's save that one. And I'm going to call that update by subquery in, since it uses that in clause. All right, that's a pretty complicated one. This next one's not so bad. Let's look at how we could update based on a join. So we could just update so many different ways. Pretty much any way that you could do a select statement, you can do that same thing in an update. We're going to update our terms ID. And we're going to join our vendor copy table that we had created. And of course, SQL Management Studio doesn't like my vendor copy table yet. Like, no, I don't believe you.
Only thing is, I love that intelligence still like pulls up like, oh yeah, I know where
It's there, yeah. No, I just haven't updated my memory tables.
That's what gets me about.
Yeah, it's like half-half.
Either recognize it or don't recognize it.
So I could copy this to make it a select statement for my testing. And I'm going to say select vendor ID and terms ID from invoice copy. And I'll use that same join syntax so that we get the same results. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it is good. At least it highlights all these keywords in blue and things like that. So we can see a little bit about what's going on. I'm going to try my select statement to see what data we're going to be impacting. Oop, it's mad at me. Ambiguous column name vendor ID. So I don't care which one I get. I'll do invoice copy. And we shouldn't have that problem on our update. So, all right. So in our select clause, we see Pacific Bell again is vendor ID 95. Right now, their terms ID are all 2. So after our update, they should all be 1 again. So let's run it. Woohoo! Okay, let's save that one. Update with join. So everybody got it? It work okay? All righty. Let's look at a more interesting one here. We have this table out here called vendor contact. Let's take a look at that table. We haven't really looked at it before. What's it called? Contact updates. There it is. So I'm going to look at this contact updates table. Look at my columns. It has vendor ID, last name, and first name. So it's not got a lot of data. If I look at my entity relationship diagram, let me find that contact updates. It doesn't have any relationships with any other tables either. So all it is like based on this vendor ID, this is the last name and first name of the person to talk to, like our account manager. So it's just going to give us that person. So we're going to do an update to add that to our vendor copy table so we know who to contact. Let's do it. We're going to update our vendor copy. We're going to set our vendor contact L name equal to last name. and our vendor contact F name equal to first name. Yeah, it's not happy at all. From vendor copy, join contact updates on vendor copy, that vendor ID equal to contact updates, that vendor ID. Yeah, it looks awful. Let's copy that to make a select statement. So my select statement, I want to select our vendor contact last name, and our vendor contact F name from our vendor copy table. And I want to do that join. I'm going to execute my ugly select statement. Oh, there's a bunch of them. Okay, so I've got some interesting names. Let's see if we can update them. Yeah, we had a lot of changes. Our contact updates table had gotten kind of out of whack there. So this update is very handy and very useful because we're updating columns based on values for the columns found in another table. So we can use one table as input to our update. Let's save that. Update from another table. Woohoo, you guys have done every kind of update query there is. I hate calling them queries because query means just reading, but SQL kind of does that. So let's delete some stuff. Let's create a new query and do some deleting. Now the syntax of the delete statement, very easy. Delete, and you can put the from keyword in or you can leave it out, but you delete table name. What happens if you don't put in a where clause? It'll delete the whole data from the table, all the data from the table. The table will still exist. It'll still be out there. It'll just be empty. So again, can be kind of deadly. We want to be careful when we're doing it. So we always want to have a where clause. Here's a real simple delete where we're just going to delete a single invoice ID. Let's put that in. Delete. Whoops. From our invoice copy table, where invoice ID equals 115. So that is our simplest delete. I'll put a select statement in. So I can make sure that that invoice exists. Of course, our row updated count will tell us, but we'll select, oh, there's that invoice ID. Now, if we run our update, we should see that we don't find that invoice anymore. So this is a basic delete. Always use a where clause. Let's save that. We'll just call that delete basic. Okay, so let's delete more than one thing. Whoops, didn't go down for me. This time we're going to get rid of everything for this vendor.
You just go get water or tea.
So let's make this a select.
You okay?
Let's run it. I'm going to put this one up here for you guys. Try it. You should delete your whole table. Make sure you try these.
Is the, I was gonna say, is the last where clause in that? What was the invoice ID?
What are you talking about?
On the, I just wanted to see where, or the vendor ID. That's what I-
Mhm. Delete your whole invoice copy table. Okay, if you look, we can format our deletes using some subqueries. I'm going to leave that one up for you for a second, but I'm not going to try to talk. No, it's just the air thing. So hopefully the air conditioner will kick on. That usually seems to help.
It'd be nice if they put you in a room that had a window.
Yeah, but then you guys would keep bringing in whipped cream Starbucks crap. All mammally. If you knew how much mammal was in that whipped cream, you wouldn't eat it. No, I think it's their dissections. They're the air conditioners on, that should help. Sorry, I know it's hard to listen to. It's getting much better though. The air came on.
I honestly didn't even know they were doing dissection.
Well, I think that they take all the remains out on Thursday morning, don't you? I think it's when they roll it past the room.
All I can say is, I will say, I might not be affected by it really, but one thing for sure, like when I'm in the room or something,
Yeah.
I remember when I think it was middle school, we dissected a frog. My goodness, I hated that smell.
Yeah, it could be the formaldehyde too. But they say, I didn't know, but I did. It's actually a really big political thing right now that a lot of people are getting away from doing actual dissections because it's so cruel to animals. And so they can do virtual dissections online and see all of the anatomy and everything without actually having to cut up mammals. So everybody fight for that. Get mammals out of the building. Virtual dissections. Be nice to animals. Yeah, we don't need the smell simulated. They actually asked that in Carthage. The health science teacher took a class to the nursing home and someone had passed away. And so the person had a kind of a bad stress reaction. And so the counselors asked her if she could get maybe a death smell bottled up or something so that she could have her students prepared for what it was gonna. It's like, I don't think I can. Do they? They do something. It's crazy. I guess it makes sense. Okay, has everybody got these deletes done? You got good deletes? Let's go on. Deleting, you know what's weird is a lot of times stuff doesn't get deleted as often as we would think because data just gets left in tables, history and things like that. Now we have subqueries here again that we can implement just like we could in our update to select which vendors we want deleted. So we have all that power with all of the deletes. The last statement that we need to look at, I'm going to take this off because I think that the air conditioner is on. Whew, try to kill me. I think that this merge statement looks really cool. It is new since I was a database administrator, so not something I've ever actually used like in the real world, but it looks like it would be very handy. So what it does is it takes a table source and merges it into another table. Yesterday or last time we saw that we could select into, which would add data to a table. The difference is the merge statement has a join condition. So if the vendor ID matches, we can do a certain action. If we can't find the vendor ID we're looking for or whatever in the file we're merging into, we can do another action. Or if we can't find it in the file we're merging from, we can do a certain action. So it gives us a lot of power. So we could be like adding new vendors depending on some file that we're getting from somebody else. So we're not going to type this one in, but I want you to know it's available in your text. So in this one, we're saying we could merge into our invoice archive. we would be using our invoice copy table, which you guys just deleted everything from, so that wouldn't help very much. And our on criteria would be our invoice IDs. So if we find a match, our invoice copy table has the same invoice ID as our archive, then we're going to update our invoice archive. So we're going to make sure that old archive, the history, has the right payment total, credit total, and payment date. Now, if there's not a match, we're going to add this invoice into our invoice archive. And if we're getting a not matched on our update, then we're going to delete it from our archive because it's not a valid invoice anymore. All right, so that's it for our updating. Let's do a quick one together, or have you think about it. So I was thinking about that referential integrity and how tough it can be. So I want you guys to do an add, an insert here. We have found out that we can order from Amazon and get some things a lot cheaper than we've been getting them. So we would like to add Amazon as a vendor, one of our vendors. Here's the address that I found online for Amazon's billing and their phone number. We might need some other information to add that vendor table. Now we're only going to order a couple of different products from them. We're going to order flash drives that cost $5, and we're going to order cases of printer paper that cost $24. So all of this stuff that we're going to get from Amazon, we're going to consider as office supplies. So it's going to go into this GL account number 570. So I did find that in our database tables already. So looking at our database diagram, for this stuff that we're going to be buying from Amazon, and actually we already have our first invoice. Our first invoice is invoice number, let me move this up, 7864-549. We got it on the 3rd, and it's 2 flash drives and 1 case of paper. So we're ready to add a bunch of stuff. So looking at our database, what do we need to add first? The vendor? Let's try it. So our vendor, I'm going to look at our vendor columns, and I'm going to add it to our real vendors table. And I see there are lots of columns in our vendor table that we're going to need to account for, but we have quite a few of them. So let's see if we can do this insert statement. I'm going to create a new query window. And I want to use my database. Now, if I specify the columns, we would be able to leave some columns empty, like our, let's see, what allows nulls, the phone number, the contact name, stuff like that. Or we can just specify them in our value list. So we'll just use a value list. So values. Now, when we do our values list, we start with a open parenthesis, and then we're going to put in our first data item. We don't need to specify a vendor ID. Remember, that's an auto number. And so SQL Server is automatically going to give us the next available vendor number as our vendor ID. So we need our vendor name, Amazon. And I'm just going to put all these in a list so I can make sure that I get them all. This address I found is P.O. Box 81226. Address 2 is empty, So I'll say null. Now our city is Seattle. And our state is Washington. And our zip code is 98108 -1226. Oops, I forgot my comma. Okay, so that brings us to zip code. Now vendor phone, 888. Oh, and that our vendor phone is variable up to 50 characters. So I guess we should go ahead and put the hyphens in because we have plenty of space. Then our next column is our contact name. Are we just going to go straight to the top? We will. We'll say we just get to talk to Jeff directly. How do you spell his last name? I don't know. I can't remember. We've got the big guy. Okay, so our default terms ID says it can't be null. Well, we know from doing all of those updates earlier that 1 is a valid terms ID. Let's use it. And then our default account number, I said I'd found that information and it was account number 570. So again, I'm going to assume that both of those are numbers because they're unique keys, and we know we don't usually use string data as a unique key. Primary key. Yes.
I just noticed that in the columns list, the last vendor contact last name blank before first.
Oh, uh-oh, thank you. That's how we get that stuff crossed up, huh? We should look and see how to spell his name, but I don't know.
It's just that the E,
Huh?
you take the E off, it's right.
It's right? Oh, cool. Okay, like that?
Yep. School ends on that.
I found all sorts of weird stuff. Okay, so does that look right? I think we're in good shape there. Now, because we're inserting directly into our production database, if we were a major corporation or something, we would need to document this, that we were doing this, because anytime there's updates to the database outside of the normal application, we would need to keep track of it. But we are ready. So let's put a select statement in after. I want to see it. Select star from vendors where vendor name equal Amazon. Now, just to make ourselves feel good, we can run that first. Yeah, we don't have any out there. And now we can run our insert with our query after, and we should have our new vendor.
So if we have happened to like run it twice, we'll just add another vendor named Amazon. All the same.
Yeah, because we don't have any rules to keep that from happening. So we would want to delete based on vendor ID to get rid of one of them. That's why I wanted us to know how to do a delete. See, it can happen really easy. Now, in our real database, we would probably have some sort of rule that said we couldn't have a duplicate vendor name, depending on how we did things at work. Wow, let's share yours. How big is our state? Look at your state over there on your columns. How big is your state? So we have to use our 2-character abbreviation. WA. Good one. Yay, okay, we got it. So cool, we've got our vendor set up now. So we still have this bill and these things that we're gonna buy from Amazon that we need to set up. So what do we need to set up next? We used an existing terms ID, so we shouldn't have to do anything there. We used an existing GL account. So we're ready to set up our invoice, aren't we? That we ordered from? Let's do it. So for this one, we're going to insert into our invoices table. So I'm going to go find my invoices table and see what kind of columns we have so we can be sure we get all of our columns.
So is there a way to like actually use the table itself, not just the information?
If you drop the table.
Oh yeah, drop. Yeah.
Mhm. So let's insert into our invoice our values. We don't need to worry about our invoice ID because it's going to be automatically generated, but we do need our vendor ID. Our vendor ID that I got was 124. Now you might have gotten a different one, so check your query because I do need to specify that to connect this invoice to that vendor. Now our invoice number was on our documentation that we received from the company, and it is 7864-549. The date on the invoice was 2019-10-3. Now our invoice total, she bought 2 flash drives at $5 each, so that would be 10, and 1 case of paper at 24, so altogether it would be $34. Our payment total is 0. We haven't paid anything on it yet. We'll make our credit total 0. We said we were going to use terms ID 1. Now our invoice due date is going to be October 31st. We got the special extended pay plan with Amazon. I'd like to get that one. And our payment date, which is our last column, is null because we haven't made any payments. So let's create a select to test this first. I'm just going to select everything from our invoices table where our vendor ID equals 124. Use your Amazon vendor ID if you've got a different one. So I've got none, which is correct. Now I should be able to run my insert, and my select statement should give me an invoice. There it is. It's all there. Is everybody's work okay? Dates look good? Awesome. Now let's add our line items because that's the last thing we've got. So we bought 2 things here. So I'm going to go look at our invoice line items table. We don't have very many columns for it. So I want to insert into invoice line items our values. And our values are going to start with our invoice ID, which, oh, I have to go back to that previous one. 115 is what I got. The invoice sequence number then is a unique number given to each thing that we bought on the invoice. So we'll say this is the first thing. We decided our GL account number was 570. The accountants already had that set up as office supplies. Now our line item amount is going to be $5. I'm going to make it 10 because we bought 2 flash drives. And our description is going to say that. 2 flash drives. I want to create a select statement to pull everything. I want to get everything from the invoice line items where the invoice ID equals 115. Nothing there, good. I'll go ahead and copy this insert and just repeat it. Now I know last time we saw how to insert multiple rows, but it was with using the column names, and I'll just do 2 simple inserts. This was a case of printer paper. And this is going to be line item number 2, the second thing we bought on this invoice. Same account number, but the price is going to be $24 instead of $10, and it's going to say printer paper instead of flash drives. So we have to kind of work our way backwards, you know, top down, put the most important thing in the database first, because we're really doing good at thinking about it. So I'm going to execute this, and when we're done, we should end up with 2 line items for our invoice 115 that show what we bought. So now we have a complete new vendor and first invoice saved in our database. So put some comments and things in those and save them however you want. And they should help you with the assignment for the homework, because some of it is adding things that are dependent on other tables. And if nobody has any questions, that's it. We're at lab time.